In this video, I want to go over the Keynesian Expenditure model from the assignment of last week. I would also highly recommend that you go back to last week and look at the video after you've had a chance to review this video about the model in itself and the document files that are in last week that go over what one should do when one has an inflationary gap or a recessionary gap as it pertains to government spending and taxation. Now, when we look at the Keynesian expenditure model, I want you to focus on the identity here. What we are saying is gross domestic product is equal to consumption by consumers, government spending, and gross private domestic investment, business spending. I have eliminated, for the time being, net exports minus imports. For this model, for this assignment, this exercise, we will focus in on government spending. What should government do when the economy faces either an inflationary gap or a recessionary gap? And the reason I am focusing on government spending right now, or as I did last week, is because this week we're focusing on fiscal policy. And fiscal policy happens to deal with, government spending and taxation. But keep in mind the identity here for GDP. So, some key terms that I tried to come across last week. Marginal propensity to consume plus marginal propensity to save is equal to 1. And what I've identified here is, what is marginal propensity to consume? Well, marginal propensity to consume simply means that percentage amount that you and I will spend with a given income level. And of course, MPS simply must mean the percentage amount that we will save based upon income. So if my marginal propensity to consume is, let's assume, 80%, that means for each dollar that I receive, I will spend 80 cents and save 20 cents. Or if it's 90% my MPC, I will spend 90 cents and save 10 cents. So why is that significant in the economy? Well, as I just indicated, if that MPC is 90%, that means that dollar I receive, I will spend 90 cents. If I spend 90 cents, somebody has to receive it. And if you are the one that receives my 90 cents, you're going to what? Spend whatever your MPC happens to be, and let's assume it's 90%. Therefore, of that 90 cents that you received from me, you're going to spend 90% of it and save 10%. And guess what? If you are spending 90% of that 90 cents, somebody must be receiving it. So from the standpoint of the Keynesian model, right, we know that that $1 will have a greater impact on GDP than just $1. And that's where the multiplier comes into effect. So what we're saying by the multiplier, I would want to know that if I spend $1, right, what's going to be the ultimate impact on the economy? And the multiplier is simply the reciprocal of my marginal propensity to save, 1 divided by MPS. So for the economy, if the marginal propensity to consume is 90%, that means my MPS is 10%, and 1 divided by 0.1 is 10, right? So what the multiplier will do, if the MPC is 90, MPS is 10%, that must mean the multiplier is 10. So that $1 that the government is spending, or I am spending in the form of consumption, will have a total impact of GDP of 10 times, or $10. Or we could look at it from the standpoint of the government, right? Or if you, government, if the government spends $1 less, if the MPC is 90%, what's going to be the ultimate impact on the economy? Not $1, but 10 times that, or the economy will go down by 10. That was the whole underlying premise of the exercise, and really from the standpoint of that video of last week and those files, documents that I had up there. So let's look at it from the standpoint of the assignment. So here you were given the MPC is 2/3. Right off the bat, you would know, right, that the MPS has to be 1/3, and that the government spending increases by 20. Oh, government increases by 20. Right here. This is the identity. The identity must always work out. What happens on the left-hand side is going to have an impact on the left-hand side. So what we're saying here is that the government's going to spend $20 billion more. Well, what's going to be the impact on GDP? Well, it's going to be more than 20 billion from what I just got done going through. So in here, the first step would be to calculate that important multiplier, right? Because that $1 that I mentioned previously is going to have a greater impact than just $1 on GDP. So in this case, the multiplier is 3. So the second step would be to take that multiplier of 3 and simply multiply it by what the government is going to spend, 20. So yes, 3 times 20 is $60 billion increase in GDP. So if the government spends 20, somebody's going to receive that 20. Oh, could be you. And you're going to spend a certain percentage of that and save it. But the ultimate impact on GDP will be a multiplier. And that's why calculating the multiplier is critical. So here it's $60 billion increase. The second question was dealing with 2 aspects. The first aspect was, okay, the prevailing level of output is 800 billion. And this goes back to when we were going through the aggregate supply and aggregate demand. What we are saying is that the prevailing level of output is 800 billion. That would simply be, equilibrium GDP, where the aggregate supply and aggregate demand curve intersect. And then you were given that the full employment output happens to be 600 billion. Well, wait a minute. We have equilibrium, but full employment, real output is 600 billion. We got a problem. And you're also given that the MPC is 0.5. Well, the MPC is 0.5. We know the MPS is 0.5. How much should the government spending be reduced to eliminate the inflationary gap? Now, let me point this out. We have a gap. We have a gap of 200 billion. So how do we identify an inflationary gap? Or how would we identify a recessionary gap? An inflationary gap occurs when equilibrium, GDP, 800 billion, is greater than full employment, GDP of 600 billion. I'm going to repeat that. How do we identify an inflationary gap? When equilibrium, 800, is greater than full employment. And full employment simply means we're fully capable in any given year of applying all resources to produce a given level in our economy. That's what we mean by full employment. So anything above full employment is what we refer to as an inflationary gap. A recessionary gap would be just the reverse of that. We're underutilizing our resources, our factors of production. So what I've done here, first step, identify the type of gap. It's inflationary, right? Since the equilibrium is 800, which is greater than the full employment. That's the first step. So I have an inflationary gap of 200. I got to eliminate that, right? I want the government to eliminate that. That's what we're saying right there. How much should government be reduced? Well, the second step would be to identify the multiplier. Multiplier is critical. Multiplier, 1 divided by MPS, 0.5. So the multiplier is 2. The third step, question is, how much should government spending be reduced? Government spending is a component part of that equation. GDP equals C plus G plus X sub n. So if the inflationary gap is 200, which we've identified, and we want to know how much should the government cut its spending to get back to 600. In other words, we want the economy, right, to go from 800 to 600. Well, what do? This is straightforward. Take the gap of 200 and divide it by the multiplier of 2, and gives us 100. Thus, government should reduce spending by 100. Okay, ramifications of that? Okay, if the government cuts spending by 100, the full impact on GDP, right? If the government reduces spending by 100, somebody's going to have $100 less. And that simply means if somebody has $100 less, they're going to cut back their consumption, as in this case, by what? Their MPC of 50%, and they're going to cut back their savings. So if you cut back your spending by 50%, that means somebody else will not receive because you've cut back your spending on something. So the full impact by the government reducing its spending by 100, we got to think multiplier now. 100 times a multiplier of 2 is 200. So when the government cuts back their spending by 100, the full impact on the economy is for the economy, GDP, to decline by 200. Guess what? 800 minus 200, we get back to what? Where equilibrium GDP and full employment GDP happens to be one and the same. When we're dealing with taxation, not as straightforward, because if I go back up here, right, to my identity, I don't see taxes. No, I don't see a T here. I see a C, I see a G, and I see an I sub G. So when we look at taxes is going to have an impact on, guess what? Your income, your disposable income. Now, this is the critical part. When the government, we got to eliminate this inflationary gap. When the government increases taxes, your income is going to go down. And when your income goes down, you're going to consume less and you're going to save less. Let me repeat that. When taxes go up, your income's going to go down, and you do one or two things with income. Spend it, consume, save. And lo and behold, let's go back up here. I got a C. And your consumption is predicated upon your level of income. So if your income goes down, your consumption will likewise decline. That's critical. That's critical when we look here at taxation. So focus on the gap. We have an inflationary gap of 200. I want to know how much should the government increase its taxes to reduce this inflationary gap? This third step here was on government spending. How much should government cut spending? Now we're talking about taxation. So we start with the 200, and we're going to take the 200 and we're going to divide it by that multiplier, which gives us 100. Okay? Then we want to take that quotient, the 200 divided by 2, and we're going to divide that by the MPC of 0.5, which gives us 200. 200. So this tells us that the government should increase taxes by 200 billion. And the 200 billion, if the government, once again, increases taxes by 200 billion, think through the logic. Taxes are going to go up by 200 billion. Your income is going to go down by 200 billion. Well, I should say really for the economy. It's going to go down by 200 billion, the income. Therefore, what's going to happen to consumption and savings? Well, if the income goes down by 200 billion, your marginal propensity to consume, the tendency to consume, to spend, is 0.5, right? So 50% times 200 billion is what? 100 billion. And the impact on the economy, you got to think of the multiplier now, 100 billion times a multiplier of 2, GDP is going to go down by 200 billion. So kind of think through that. Let me go through this one more time. You take that inflationary gap, taxation now, 200. I'm going to divide that 200 by my multiplier. That's going to give me 100. I'm going to take that 100 and I'm going to divide it by the MPC of 0.5. And that's going to give me the 200 billion of tax increases. So when you're dealing with taxation and its impact on either an inflationary gap or a recessionary gap, this is the process that you must take in order to find out what the taxation should be. Once again, review this video. I would go back to last week and once again look at that video and the document that I have up that kind of goes through this process once again.